Hi everyone, Jai Hind and welcome to the platform of StudyIQ IAS in English. My name is Bhavar Singh Suremix, NDA 115th course and qualified civil services in 2012, and I welcome you on the platform. Now, you must have seen in the social media and also in the newspaper about the Satluj movie. Now, there is an uproar about this because ultimately this movie got banned just after 2 days where it was released on the social media, OTT platform, that is Z5. Now, over here, it is quite important to understand that when it comes to the release of the movies, so it is in the theatres, if it is to be released, so it is guided by the NBFC. NBFC has to certify the movie, and that is National Board for Film Certification. But when it comes to the social media or it comes to the OTTs, so there is no such kind of institution that is there which actually certifies it. And over here, the union government, it actually uses the IT Act that was passed, and through that framework, it can ban any of the movie. But at the same time, we are not talking about the movie over here. We'll be talking about the real issues, the real causes in this complete session along with me in this platform, on this platform. Alright, now coming to the core issue that is here, it is about basically a 30-year-old, the human rights case that was there, and a censor board Sega and the 2-day-old OTT ban which converge to the single question the exam keeps returning to. And this question is, how does a democracy manages a memory that can still be weaponized? Over here, this is also quite important because ultimately when the courts, they have already convicted the guilty. Alright, we have the guilties which had already been convicted by the Supreme Court, and over here the question is that why does the story, it still is frightening the state, and ultimately there was a ban that was issued for the film. Now, this is quite important that Jaswant Singh Khalra's finding, they were enforced. They were about the enforced disappearances. They were vindicated by the Supreme Court, and the conviction of the policeman was also done. Yet the film that is built upon the vindicated record was pulled from India, or it is pulled from the OTT platform just within 48 hours of its release. And this asks that ultimately what gaps fills about the history, about the security and the complete expression as well. So therefore, this is quite important article that will be discussing, or the important thing that have happened in the country that we'll be discussing in today's session. Now, when it comes to the Punjab, alright, the Punjab in 1980s, or I will say in 1973, this story had started. In 1973, there was the Anandpur Sahib resolution that was taken, and this was Akali Dal's demand for the greater status, the state autonomy, which was later read by some of them as the separatist blueprint. And although this was contested by its authors as federalists because they just demanded more autonomy for the state itself. Now, what happened was that there was rise of militancy in Punjab in 1980-83, where Jarnail Singh Bhindranwala, his influence it grew, and armed insurgency for the separate Khalistan, it gained grounds in the Punjab. Later on, there was Blue Star, Operation Blue Star also, that was launched in June 1984, where the army, it actually, entered into the Golden Temple complex. Official toll of this is 576, but the independent estimates, they say that this was quite higher than that. Now, the phase that was there between 1984 to 1992, it was the phase of the insurgency and the counter-insurgency operation, where ultimately the militant violence, it was escalated, which was met by the intensive Punjab police operations as well. And there the allegations of the extrajudicial killings and the secret cremations which actually grew. And between 1993 to 95, there was the insurgency that was contained by the police operations under KPS Gill. So this is the complete Punjab that we are talking about, and this film actually pertains to this era itself that we are speaking about. We will be talking about this in detail in the session, but before that, let me tell you that we have the lowest price drop that you can see, and ultimately you can use the code that is BRS Live for enrolling into the platform. Alright, we have various courses which are available for your preparation for the UPSC, and you can enroll by using the code BRS Live so that you will get the maximum discount. Now over here, what is about Khalistan? Now when it comes to the Khalistan, this was basically a political demand, where the Anandpur Sahib resolution in 1973, it sought autonomy within India, where it was about the river water rights, it was about Chandigarh status, the center and state balance as well. So ultimately the author of the Anandpur Sahib resolution, they deny that this was actually secessionist. At the same time, there was the armed insurgency that grew right from the early 1980s, where the militant outfits, they pursued a sovereign Khalistan by force, where there were bombings, there were the targeted killings and the cross-border support networks as well. Also, when it comes to the diaspora, so after 1995, when the Khalistani movement, it was basically crushed under KPS Gill. So what happened was that the movement center of gravity, it actually shifted to the abroad, where we have the referenda, we have the lobbying and the social media campaigns, which are being run largely from Canada, from the UK and from Australia also. Now, over here it is quite important to note that when it comes to Khalra, so Khalra was basically, he was attached with Akali Dal as well, but at the same time, he investigated the abuses which were committed during the counter-insurgency period. And it is quite important to note that he was not a Khalistani sympathizer. Please remember this, that he was not a Khalistani sympathizer that we are talking about. So what is about the story about Jaswant Singh Khalra? So this story is basically of a bank manager. He was a bank manager and later on he was also the human rights wing office bearer of Akali Dal. Now here what Khalra did was that he turned the municipal cremation records against or into the nationally significant human rights document. The method that he used was that he cross-checked the Punjab police records of unidentified bodies against the municipal cremation grounds logs in the Amritsar district. And in his finding, he found out that there are the thousands of the bodies which were cremated as unclaimed without the identification or even the notice that was given to the families. Many allegedly, they were picked up in the police custody and never they were produced before a court as well. Now, this is quite important because Khalra publicly estimated that there were over 25,000 disappearances which had been linked to the counter-insurgency operations across Punjab, and this is a figure that remains contested even till now. Alright, but it was never officially refuted as well. Now, the platform that he took, so ultimately he took his findings to the Punjab and Haryana High Court, which converted the local records into the legal public record as well. So ultimately this is quite important that when it comes to his method, so in his method he actually used the state's own paperwork against its own denial at that point of time. So this is a template for the modern human rights documentation, where it is from the enforced disappearance tribunals that led to the UN working group on the enforced disappearances as well. Now for UPSC, this is quite important because it is clean case study for the evidence-based accountability for that is distinct from the political advocacy or activism as well that was built on the allegation alone. Now this is quite important that after his finding, afterwards what happened was on 6th of September 1995, he was abducted or he was taken outside from his Amritsar home from the men which were later identified as the Punjab police personnel just after his findings, they went public. So ultimately over here, he was never seen alive again by his family, and his own case, it became the second self-referential instance of the very pattern that he had documented in his findings. Now, what happened was later on when the case went to the Supreme Court, so CBI, it actually took over the probe from the Punjab Police, which is the Committee for the Information and the Initiative on the Punjab and related petitions, and later on it had given the state police conflict of it was because of the state police conflict of interest as well, because it was alleged that actually the Punjab policemen, they were involved into these killings and even for the abduction of Khalra. Now, in the conviction, what happened was in 2005, because of the CBI. So, CBI court convicted several Punjab police personnel for his abduction and murder, which is a rare instance of the accountability for the enforced disappearance that is there in India. But ultimately, this legacy, it was fed into the national jurisprudence as well, where we can see that ultimately there was the wider Supreme Court framework in 2011 and earlier in 1990s directions that were there for the custodial death, for the compensation, and the NHRC, that is National Human Rights Commission's expanded mandate over the Punjab era disappearances as well. So this is quite important because this relates to your GS paper 4 as well, where it is about the moral courage, where it is about the whistleblowing against one's own institution's excesses and the personal cost of the conviction. Because ultimately, they were the words of Khalra himself before his abduction that he would continue regardless of the threat, which are often cited in the answers of the courage of conviction and the ethical governance that is during or under the duress. Now, there were certain institutions which Khalra case activated. The first one is the NHRC, or the National Human Rights Commission, which actually took the cognizance of the mass killings or the cremations that were done in Punjab, and its involvement. It actually helped to establish the disappearance compensation jurisprudence in India. There was also the Supreme Court, which directed the CBI investigation, and ultimately this have shaped the custodial death and the compensation doctrine for the complete police custodies. Also, there is the CBI, which actually took over the probe, and ultimately it had convicted the Punjab police personnel in 2005. And there is Punjab and Haryana court as well. Now, over here, Khalra initially took his cremation ground evidence, which converted the local record into the legal proceedings ultimately. Now, this is quite important that when it comes to this movie, that is Satluj. So, there was the name that was changed thrice. This is the third name that the movie it got. The first name that was there, it was basically the title one, that is Gallu Ghara. Now, this is the original title, which is basically the historical term that was used for the 18th century mass killings of Sikhs. That was there in 1746 and 1762 as well. And by the extension for the 1984, this term was used for, or this title was used originally for the movie. Now, the CBFC, or the Central Board of Film Certification, it has objected to the loaded historical resonance. Now, there was a second title that was, given to the movie, and that is Punjab 95. Now, this was basically where the movie, it was talking about the specific dated period rather than the emotionally charged historical term that was there earlier. Again, there was a dispute by the CBFC, and then this title was also dropped. And this is the third title that the movie had used, that is Satluj, which is the final title used for the surprise and ultimately uncut OTT premiere was done on Z5 on 3rd of July 2026. So this is just the 48 hours that we are talking about, right from the release to the removal. On 3rd of July, that is on Friday, there was surprise premiere. Ultimately, Satluj drops on Z5, which was uncut without any kind of prior promotion, where the makers, they feared that advanced publicity, it would invite a preemptive block on the publication. Then on the Saturday and Sunday, this film actually, it went viral. Ultimately, what happened was that film trended nationally. The diaspora and domestic audiences both engaged heavily, and Dosanjh, who is actually the lead actor, he publicly said or signaled that ultimately there would be removal of this movie from the OTT platform. Now, on Sunday, 5th of July in the evening, the center reportedly directed the removal under the IT rules of 2021, citing the national security protocols and the public order concerns as well. However, these directions, they were not made public, and by Monday, 6th of July, we have seen that the Z5, it has removed the film from the Indian catalogue, although it remains live on the global platform that is there. Alright, so this is important, that why 26 and not 95 or 2005, that is basically we are talking about. Now, this is quite important that when it comes to the insurgency, it had ended 3 decades ago. Alright, it had ended 3 decades ago, that is in 1995. What makes it cinematic retelling is quite important and live security question that we have today. Because ultimately it is the diaspora Khalistan revival that had been since 2020. Now, when it comes to the referendum campaigns, they had been there. Alright, 6 for the justice style unofficial Khalistan referendum. This is there in Canada, it is there in UK, in Australia as well since 2021. Also, when it comes to the dispute that is there between India and Canada, so the ties between India and Canada, they strained in 2023, and ultimately that is over the killing of Nijjar. And again, this killing is again, it is in the news because of the Department of Justice, which have linked the killing back to Indian networks. And also, ultimately, this is the narrative competition where we are talking about the state excesses of the 1980s or 1990s. Even when the court have established, they are the live material for, or in the diaspora, separatist messaging that could be utilized. And that is why when it comes to the state, so the film which is using a title like Gallu Ghara, they had deliberately echoed the 1746, 1762 and 1984 mass killings. So it isn't read by the state as the neutral history. Basically, it is read as the language that can be lifted directly into the separatist messaging abroad, regardless of the film's own factual accuracy or the court's findings on Khalra also. So that is the crux of the free expression versus security dilemma that this case actually poses. So over here it is quite important that when it comes to the other democracies, so there are the other democracies as well, but how they treat their media on the social media platform. So in the United Kingdom, there is no pre-censorship of the OTT content by the state body. Now there are the CBFC ratings, they are advisory for most of the platforms, and if there is any security sensitive takedowns, that must be through the court injunctions and there cannot be any executive direction. Now, when it comes to the United States, the First Amendment, it actually bars the prior restraint almost absolutely. Also, the national security content restriction, it relies on the narrow judicially tested exceptions. And again, there is no administrative platform orders which are released, or there is no executive control or direction that could be released for the containment of the social media platform. Then in Germany, there are the strong post facto speech restrictions which actually exist, which is basically on the extremist symbols, but again, they are statute based and judicially reviewable, and they are not opaque executive directions, like for example that had been it had been issued in the case of India, where we do not know about what direction is all about. And then in Singapore, this is closer to the Indian system that you see, where there is the broad executive discretion to restrict the content for the public order, exercised with fewer procedural safeguards than in the liberal democracies that are there. Now, ultimately, it is quite important that when it comes to the regulatory framework, so we have the regulatory framework for the film release when it comes to the theatre. All right, but at the same time, when it comes to social media or when it comes to OTT platforms, so what is the requirement and how that could be regulated? So we have the pending bill, that is Broadcasting Services Regulation Bill. This was proposed framework, but again, it had been repeatedly floated, bringing the OTT platform or the content under a more formal CBFC-like pre-classification regime. Now, over here, it had been stalled because the industry has pushed back it over the prior restraint concern. There is right now the self-regulating bodies which actually exist. All right, these are the existent model where we have Digital Media Content Regulatory Council and even platform level self-classification that remain only the primary OTT check that we have in India, alongside with 3-tier IT rules grievance mechanism, but neither has the pre-release veto power just like we have for the CBFC. And there is the judicial testing as well, where it comes to this kind of incidents. So there had been no major court that have yet tested the legality of an opaque, undisclosed takedown or direction for the OTT release. So over here, this is quite important that the matter had been filed in the Punjab and Haryana High Court already. So over here, we will see that ultimately this live gap, it could shape the future press freedom and the platform jurisprudence when it comes to the OTT platforms. And there is also very important that when it comes to the complete issue, so there is the theatrical release, there is the OTT release, but right now we are seeing that these are, blurring. So ultimately we need a unified system or unified regulator that must be there. All right, so this is quite important that there is the case for the single technology neutral content regulation framework that grows stronger in India, and that is quite important for the complete regulatory framework that you can see. Over here, it is quite important that when it comes to history, it doesn't stay in the past tense. It gets relitigated every time a state decides whose memory is safe to circulate, and that is the major question that this complete issue it raises. So that would be all in this video, but at the same time, let me remind you once again that I have told you in the start, and that we have the Resolution P2I batch, which is basically English GS Foundation batch that we have on the platform of StudyIQ, where you can enroll. And over here, you are getting this opportunity that there is the lowest price drop on the platform of StudyIQ. You can use the code BRS Live for enrolling into any of the courses that are available on the StudyIQ platform. So that would be all, but do not forget to like the session, to share the session with your friends, and even to subscribe to our channel so that you do not miss any of the updates in the future. Thank you, bye-bye, take care, and Jai Hind.